Kris Balkcom, Assistant Extension Professor, Auburn University, Crop Soil Environmental Sciences Department. I'm going to be talking to you today, giving you a peanut update from 2020.
All right, first off, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to cover update today on peanuts from this past year, what we saw from across the state, a little bit about our general production statewide, kind of crop we had, and then our growing regions. Then we'll cover some of the research trials that we had, mainly dealing with the agronomic factors, such as our seeding rates, seed treatments, row spacing tests, and then of course our variety tests. Here's a shot showing the certified peanut acres across Alabama from 2020. You can see we have a wide range scattered all over the state, predominantly in the south, east, and west, but we do have still a growing region up in North Alabama that continues to add some acres here and there on each side of the state. This past year, 2020, we had 180,000 acres of peanuts planted. We had an estimated yield of 4,000 pounds per acre. However, I thought that was always a little bit high for NASS, but we wind up around 3,500 pounds per acre. For 2020, we had a good potential there early on. We did hit some dry times there in July and August there throughout the state. We did start back raining, and we seem to continue to rain through all the growing, through the rest of the growing season, on into harvest season. Therefore, that hindered us trying to get the crop out as timely as we wanted to. We did have some earlier cooler temperatures in the fall, which probably kept us from losing many peanuts as we did. I think if it would have been a warm late fall, we would have had a lot more crop loss than what we even experienced. The cooler temperatures just seemed to slow the crop down, allow us a little bit more time to get in there and get it, but the weather still hindered us there. So around 3,500 pounds is where we're going to be for the state average. Oftentimes, many times I get asked the question, when should I plant? You know, I think number one thing determining when to plant, obviously is the soil temperature. And there's many things that affect the soil temperature, such as air temperature, the different soil types, soil moistures, whether you have a cover crop or not on the land, and the type tillage you do. If you're looking at no-till or conventional till. I would pay attention to Peanut RX is a risk management tool that's been developed through University of Georgia and Auburn University, South Carolina, University of Florida, Mississippi State, just a number of the universities that went together and put their efforts together to develop this Peanut RX. And it gives you kind of a risk tool and lowering your chances of receiving tomato spotted wilt. Also gives you some degrees as far as points for leaf spot and white mold, and then it's different point system from when you plant and so forth, just to kind of lower your risk there. I'd advise everybody to take a look at this. You've got different points for different varieties because they have different virus resistances, and that's something that was developed for tomato spotted wilt that we had many years ago, and we seem to have forgot about tomato spotted wilt when we come with 06G because of its resistance level. And however, we've had that variety now for a number of years. We now still see tomato spotted wilt in the field, and we've seen it increase in the last few years. So it's certainly something to be aware of. And I would advise everybody to take advantage of this tool. It's still being used, and to help be sure that you lower your risk in being infected with this virus. I'll talk a little bit about seeding rates. Our standard seeding rate program has always been on 36-inch row peanuts, 6 seed per foot is what we've recommended planting. That's to ensure ourselves to get 4 plants per foot to receive maximum yields. And if you're on 30-inch rows, that would be 5 seed per foot would be equivalent to 6 seed on 36. So we still recommend that, and we know that there are a lot of others that are planting higher seeding rates. You hear about some of these high yield guys in Georgia and so forth. So one thing that we've done, I know, is obviously it's going to the top seed that you have, how good a quality seed you have, it is going to affect that on the seeding rate. So, we recommend these seeding rates if you have good and adequate seed. Obviously, if you have poor seed, like we experienced a lot of seed issues this past year, you very well may need to have a higher seeding rate. But we had a test this past year where we took some of that just regular saved seed stored in a warehouse, and we planted at these different seeding rates to see could we really see a difference in our standard 6 seed per foot. And here you can see at the bottom we had on the x-axis we had 10 seed per foot, 6 seed per foot, 3.5 seed, 5.5, 4, and 8 seed per foot. On the y-axis you can see our yield in pounds per acre. Now it looks obviously that the 10 seed per foot, besides being numerically higher, looks like it was significantly way higher than the others. However, there was no statistical difference between 10 seed and 6 seed and 3.5 seed here per foot. So therefore, our 6 seed per foot, which is recommended, is still adequate for seeding rate with good quality seed. We'll continue to look at this. This was planted in small plots and randomized and replicated 4 times across there. Penicillin disease, Aspergillus niger. This is a seedling disease that we certainly saw a lot of this past year. It causes those plants to die out early on in the season and causes us to thin our stand down. We have a new seed treatment there this past year that came out, which is called Rancona. That's in addition to our traditional Dynasty PD treatment that's available. We also recommend applying an in-furrow fungicide to help battle against seedling disease. So this past year we tested those different seed treatments. Our new one, which was the Rancona, to the Dynasty, to compare it to without anything, was our Check. The AB that you see here with the Rancona is the addition of a bound to Rancona in-furrow. That's just plain Rancona seed treatment. And we also applied the Abound with the Dynasty treatment, and then Dynasty alone with no in-furrow. You can see here that the Rancona with the Abound was numerically higher, but statistically the same as the Rancona, and Rancona was significantly higher than just Dynasty alone or even the Checks without anything. That was also the early planting test that was in April, so we did that again in June as a late planting to see if the treatments still were effective and beneficial to apply seed treatment later in the year as those soil temps warm up. And you can see here, according to this data, that it was a benefit to apply the seed treatments with the Abound to both of them, and without were both significantly higher than the Check. This was some plant stands that we had this past planting season on some grower fields just across the southeastern region of the state. Very typical. We knew we were going to have some seed quality issues out there. You can see here we had a few early plants that came up, and then we came back in here and made a decision to replant. And we did not destroy the stand that we had, but we just patched in some more seed. Our first stand counts after the first planting was 1.4 plants per foot. Like I said, our goal is to shoot for at least 4 plants per foot, so we were significantly less than that. We made a decision to go in and add some more, and we wound up getting 2.6 there, so then we worked out exactly at 4 plants per foot. We still seem to have a decent grade there from these places, even though you may think, well, they were spaced way out different times. But we had held back as long as we could, and then we went in there and even applied the herbicides such as paraquat to try to knock those early ones back to keep them from setting any early fruit, to maybe get them closer to the others, since we were a few weeks behind planting them. Seems like as we went on there through the planting season, typically we will see the, if we've got some weak seed out there, it's worse early in the planting season with those cooler temperatures. As we move later in the planting season, You don't seem to have as big a problem from that. However, this past year, the seed just got worse and worse as the year went on throughout the planting season. You know, one of the things I say that's an issue with that is we have, say like this bulk seed stored in these seed totes. Now here, this is fine the way these are stacked in a warehouse. You know, they're all just one level and spaced out in there. I can get to them all to pull them out. What happens is a lot of times is you may look at a seed storage warehouse and there'll be 2 or 3 totes stacked high in there, and then there's all jammed up next to each other. They can't breathe, and then they may go in there and get 4, 5, 6 totes off the front of them, pull those out with a forklift and load them up, and then here comes in some more seed to store in that place. It goes back in front of them, and you may have totes that are stacked up 2 or 3 high in the back that stay in that warehouse all the way through planting season that never get out and get into farmers' hands to go plant. And they stayed stuck in there and they can't breathe. Obviously that seed has to breathe and air out because that makes a huge difference when it comes to germination, how those seeds are stored and handled. So now as we move on, we talk about which variety should I plant this year. So certainly a topic everybody wants to be planting the top variety out there that's going to give them the biggest advantage yield-wise on their farm. And as you know, like I said, mentioned earlier, we've been planting 06G for quite some time right there now, and we know that there's got to be another one that's coming along to take its place. So we'll take a look at what we've seen across the state. Obviously, when we're selecting a variety, we've got to think about different disease pressures. As you can see here, with these different varieties that's planted across these plots, you can see some defoliation out there. So you know there's a lot of difference out there when it comes to the disease pressure that's within these varieties. You can see here a lot of white mold there on some of those. And just a big difference. This was actually in the same field, even though the color looks a little different. But late fall, we had a lot of warm, wet weather, and that really shed those peanuts off, and then you got another variety that can withstand that here. So you obviously want to make the best determination as possible and select the right variety. And you can see here during the growing season, we've got a canopy here of Flow-Run 331s on the left, TIF NBHO on the right. That TIF NBHO has a real dark foliage canopy, very distinct when you look at it. But the other point is all these new varieties here now seem to all grow a lot of vines. Have plenty of vine out there compared to what we used to see with the old Georgia Green, and then when we started with 06G. Here's 06G on the left. We got AU17s on the right, and just a lot of thick vines out there. Same thing with even 12Y, which everybody knows grows a lot of vine on the right, and then Georgia 16HO on the left. So as we look at this on-farm trial that we had in southwest Alabama and Baldwin County, we planted these same 6 varieties scattered across all the locations this past year. We had 12Y top the trial numerically here in Baldwin County this past year, as it has the last couple of years down there. You got a high rainfall area like that, a lot of disease pressure. A variety like 12Y that has a really good disease package. It can hold on to those peanuts late season and give you a little competitive edge over some of those other varieties. Georgia 16HO did pretty well there. It doesn't have as strong of, it's kind of similar to, probably not quite as good as 06G is when it comes to just leaf spot resistance on its own. However, if it's treated good and in a good rotation, you know, it's going to hold on there pretty good. You know, like I said, we were a little bit cooler temperatures, and that helped there as far as lower that disease pressure this past year. 18RU is a variety, it's another high oleic from Bill Branch that it seems to be, I haven't really seen a lot of good consistency with this variety in the past couple of years across the test. So I know some people looked at it this past year on their farms in a small amount of seed, but some were disappointed with that. Best thing about it, it does great. It is a high grader, but it's very favorable as far as its yield. I haven't seen a lot of good consistency with that variety. Looking in central Alabama and Selma, 06G topped the trial numerically there, but the same as 18RU and 16HO. I think this was one of the few locations out of the past couple of years that 06G won a trial. So certainly shows you that we've got some other varieties that have the capability of yielding with it and out yielding it. But here it was about the same with each other there. Looking at Society Hill, more on the east side of the state, central out from Auburn. Flow Run 331 from Florida, from Barry Tillman's, topped the trial there. A little bit drier environment here. You can see the yields were a little lower in that 3,000 pound range. However, Flow Run 331 is a variety that's done very well in that location for the past 2 years, and even before that, the Tough 511 that Barry had also done well there in that location. It's an area where they don't have as much disease pressure. Because I say the biggest thing about the Flow Run 331, it's just not as good a virus resistance as what we'd like to see in a new variety. However, you put it somewhere where it doesn't have a lot of virus pressure, and it can perform very well for you. Which 06G is planted a lot there in that particular region, and you can see all the varieties performed as well or better than 06G did. Looking in Henry County, they're out from the Headland area. Even Flow Run 331 done well there. With GA12Y, followed by AUMPL 17 and 16HO, and here obviously is another big 06G growing region, and you can see there's a pretty good significant benefit to planting a different variety besides 06G. And then here, as you can tell in this traditional growing area, where at Georgia 18RU is. Most times it just doesn't have a good enough disease package to withstand. Moving up to North Alabama, around that Sand Mountain region, out from Sneed's. Again, Flow Run 331 looked very similar to what it did in Central Alabama. Performed well there. They still plant 297s and 09Bs there in that region, which done fine there. You've got to have, really, in my opinion, some disease pressure to get one of these varieties like AUMPL 17 to stand out and shine there. You back up a few years back when they had that warm, wet fall, and AUMPL 17 really shined up there. But they typically just don't have as much disease pressure up there, and that's the reason they still plant 09Bs there in northeast Arkansas and even the Blue Hills of Missouri. But as you can see, we get some of these other varieties out there available. They can yield with 09B and sometimes a little better. So looking at the grades from all these locations combined and averaged together, one of the biggest weaknesses with AUMPL 17 is its grade. It's going to grade more in that low 70s and at best mid 70 range. So you can see we were right about 72 with the average grade we did over all these locations. I know that's a little disappointing there for some, but it just seems like it's hard to find that one variety that has that silver bullet, that has everything that we're looking for, such as like what 06G has offered us for a number of years. It was a high yielder, had good virus resistance, and then it would also grade in the upper 70s or 80. And that's the reason why it hasn't been replaced yet. We may have some that have good virus resistance, but then they don't grade as good. We may have some that can hold the peanuts or a high yielder, but they're weak in another area. So that's probably AUMPL 17's weakness, is it's just not a real high grader. Flow Run 331, more in that mid 70 range, but it will, like I said, it's susceptibility to virus. GA12Y, that's a small seeded variety, normal oil chemistry. But it's gonna be more times in that low 70 range. At best, ever it'll be is a 75. But like I said, it's the only long season variety that we have out there with a good disease package. But even though it's a small seeded variety and a thin hull, it still just will not grade high. Of course, 06G, you can see what's kind of equivalent to that: 16HO, 18RU, be are all very similar in the upper 70 range. So here, talk a little bit, we've got this spot here in the field. This is nematode, peanut root knot nematode damage in the field. As you can look and see a close-up here, you can see the galls on the nuts itself. And then as far as damage on to the pins, that will in turn cause those to swell up and create infection and get weak and then fall off and lose those peanuts there. But that's peanut root knot nematode damage. So what is our defense against that? You know, we have these other products to use, but then we also have some varieties that are resistant to peanut root knot nematode. Such here we have TIF-NV HO, which has kind of took the place of TIF guards, and it's in comparison to Georgia 14N. It seems like more of our tests we've seen TIF-NV outperform the Georgia 14N. And as many as y'all know, TIF guard in the past years, you know, was a good variety. It just seemed to have weak stems sometimes. I haven't ever come across that with TIF-NV except this past year. You can see the number of peanuts here on the ground. This was TIF-NVs here, and it seemed like we made a lot, but we also lost a lot into the ground. And I told them that really hasn't been a characteristic of that variety in the past. It's always seemed to hold on there fine, and I didn't ever think there was any issue with the stem there. I think that was just weather related and soil conditions at this time. I think that dirt was just heavy, and we just lost them there. I don't think it would have mattered which variety we had in that particular field this year to do that. So I'm not really going to hold that against that variety there right now, because that's the only time I've seen it and experienced it. But here we have a nematode test and some small plots there this past year in Headland. And we took Georgia 06G and we applied per pulse at 13.6 ounces to the acre. And then we had 2 shots of iodate at 17 ounces to the acre. Statistically, numerically, this was the highest yielding treatment out there in the test. TIF guard, as I mentioned, was a good nematode resistant variety. However, you know, there's just not as much seed of that out there still. And there's the TIF-NV numerically ahead of 14N. As you look at some of those other variety trials that we had, like even in Fairhope, even there's no nematodes there. TIF-NV performed pretty well there, which was also significantly higher than the other nematode varieties such as 14N, which was the same case that we had the year before there in 2019 as well. TIF-NV was here, 14N was over here. So let's talk a little bit about the peanut variety test that we had in Headland this past year. Here we had these top 06 varieties statistically were the same from ACI 3321, which is the same cross as AUMPL 17. Those top 6 varieties were all statistically the same from there up. And this was the dry land test. Like I said, there they are averaging just under 6,000 pounds. Here's our tomato spotted wilt per plants. Right here, number of plants. You can see TIF guards are very low. 12 Ys of 6, AUMPL 17 to 7.5. Very good resistance there with those varieties. And then you look at some of the other, as I mentioned, that flow around 331. There's nearly 17 hits there on the plant, so significantly higher there. That's what's alarming about that variety, and I told you that I always have to keep it in your mind about that. Planting that in an area that doesn't have a lot of Irish pressure, or planting it at the right time later in the season, not planting it first or early where you've got more thrips pressure and it can cause that to be infected. So certainly plant that later on and not first if you're utilizing that variety. Here's our leaf spot percent defoliation. You can see very good leaf spot resistance with ACI 3321 as well as AUMPL 17. 12 Ys also good. You can see that in comparison to Georgia 06G at a 6.3. So we certainly have some new varieties there that's coming on and maybe we can utilize there. Wasn't a lot of white mold in either one of the varieties here in the dryland test. So as we look at the irrigated test there at Headland, Again, ACI 3321 topped that trial around 6,250 pounds. And then we've got, or I guess about the top 8 varieties right there. Our top 10 right there were no significant difference between them. You can see very similar ACI 3321, AUMPL 17, 16HO, all in comparison to Georgia 06G, even 12Y. So as we look there at the virus ratings there on the irrigated test, again, you can see where those were that 4s and 5s, and then look for that 331 again, there's 13.5, so significantly higher right there. And that's alarming about that variety. Let's look at leaf spot is in this column. A lot more leaf spot pressure there in that irrigated test compared to the dry land, but you can certainly see some good leaf spot resistance right there in AU17. That's something that's going to give it an edge. Very similar to 06G, and then as we look at the grades from that irrigated test with those varieties, you can see everything overall was a little lower grading. There, honestly, we dig those because you got so many different dig dates for those different varieties that are grouped together. We kind of dig on those number of days, and we know that was a little bit early. The grades show here that it's a little bit early with an average grade of 70.4 over all the varieties. And you can see those on-farm trials where we kept those a little longer. Those cooler temperatures that we had allowed those peanuts to mature up full, even though that put them way long in the days. But you can see those grades are more realistic there than what we were seeing right here on this test. Talk a little bit about twin rows versus single rows. We obviously test that, like I said, in our standard 8-inch twin row pattern. This past year in 2020, this was the varieties that we tested. It's available out there to producers, and looked at those in twin versus single rows. We did not get a significant benefit planting twin rows over the single rows there in 2020, nor did we see one in 19. However, in 16, 17, and 18, we did see about 300 pounds benefit. But the last 2 years, we have not seen a benefit planting twin rows. I think if you looked at that all over the state of different soil types, you may see that. But here, this was a good Dothan soil. We just didn't see a benefit the past 2 years. Apogee is a plant growth hormone that's we've started looking at here to look at trying to lessen that vine size, not have so much of a canopy out there. Caution many producers to be careful when using that and trying it on their own. We've still been looking at this. Here we were looking at it in the Gulf Coast region, so we're there in a high rainfall area. We had looked at this in 19, and overall in the test, we did turn off dry there late in the fall in 19, so that probably hurt it there, even though it was dry in Baldwin County, which is typically not late in the season. But we did hurt ourselves there some last year because it was dry late, and those peanuts suffered some where we put that full late. This past year, where we were getting more rain, you can see at this particular test here, it looks like there was a slight benefit to using the Apogee. It's very costly, so you want to see there's about 300 pounds to that full rate. But that's a pretty high dollar hefty treatment, and that's just one test, one location right here. As you look in North Alabama here, we did not see a benefit to using the Apogee there. I looked at it again in Barber County on some irrigated ground there, and here the half rate was less than the check plots, and the 5.4 ounces, which is about a 3/4 rate, was a little bit higher, but really no significant yield benefit there, no significant difference in yield right there. Certainly didn't pay for the treatment either. I'd like to thank Alabama peanut producers, their support in our research, and use of their checkoff dollars, and also for Georgia Foundation Seed. So that concludes my presentation there. Thank y'all again for your support, and opportunity there to cover this.